The day the HOA put a chain across my ranch road was the same day I decided I was done playing nice. I'm Jackson Trent, 52, mechanic by trade, rancher by passion. I bought my property out here in Red Hills to get away from the nonsense peace, open land, and a driveway long enough to stretch a full mile. It was mine. At least I thought it was, then she moved in. Karen Newley. HOA board president for the Red Hills Meadows Association, gated, manicured, and nosier than a church bake sale. She was the kind of woman who looked over her glasses even when she wasn't wearing any. It started small. A friendly letter about my barn being visible from the road. Then it escalated. Complaints about my livestock, fencing, even the color of my mailbox. I wasn't even in their HOA. My land backed up to theirs, but I was a separate parcel, independent, free. They didn't like that. Last Thursday, I drove out to check my fence line and found a thick steel chain strung across my own access, my road padlocked at both ends. A shiny HOA private access residence only sign dangled from it. I threw my truck in park and stormed up to the nearest house, which happened to be Karen's. She stood on her porch watering fake plants, wearing a pastel tracksuit and that permanent look of unwarranted superiority. "You block my road?" I asked, holding up my phone. I had pictures of the chain, the sign, even the HOA seal on it. Karen didn't even blink. "That road cuts through Red Hills Meadows. It's private property. Board voted last week to restrict non-resident access. We posted notice." "No, you posted a sign on my road," I said. "You're mistaken," she replied, turning back to her plastic hydrangeas. "That path runs along our eastern boundary. It's within our easement. That land's mine. I've got the deeds, surveys, and tax records to prove it." Karen waved her hand, dismissing me like I was a stray dog. "Then I suggest you take it up with the county. Until then, it stays blocked." I did just that. Drove straight to the county clerk's office, pulled every single record I had on that land, and even paid for a fresh survey. Took me 3 days and a few $100, but the result. That road was mine, no easement, no shared jurisdiction. Karen and her little HOA didn't own a single inch of it, but I didn't go back to her. Not yet. Instead, I went to the county assessor's office. That's when I found out something real interesting. The HOA never properly purchased the roadways in Red Hills Meadows. The developer defaulted before finalizing the subdivision transfer, and the streets had remained under a dormant holding company, one that the county was about to auction off due to unpaid taxes. I made one phone call. One bid. 2 weeks later, I owned every street in Red Hills Meadows. Karen had blocked my road, so I bought hers. I didn't go public right away. See, a man doesn't buy out every inch of asphalt in a neighborhood just to brag about it. Not when he's got plans. And I had them. Layered, precise, and about as subtle as a snake in high grass. The deed transfer went through quietly. I used an LLC to keep my name out of the early paperwork. Let them keep watering their lawns and sending out their little newsletters, blissfully unaware that every step they took on their morning walks now happened on my property. It wasn't until I had the ownership recorded at the county and scheduled new maintenance assessments that I made my first move. I sent a single certified letter to the Red Hills Meadows HOA. The envelope was beige. The kind of beige that told you the contents inside had consequences. I used plain language, nothing fancy, just facts. As the new owner of the private roadways, I was introducing a usage agreement. Fees would be assessed quarterly, triple what their previous maintenance budget had been. Non-payment would result in restricted access. The board called an emergency meeting that night. I didn't attend, but I did park my truck just outside their clubhouse and let them see me sitting there with a thermos of coffee and a clipboard. I watched porch lights flick on, board members shuffle in with furrowed brows and folders clutched like shields. They didn't come out smiling. Next morning, I got a visit. This time it wasn't Karen. It was a man in a blazer 2 sizes too tight, sweating through his collar even though it was barely 70 outside. He introduced himself as Mitchell, the HOA's legal counsel. "You've created quite a stir, Mr. Trent," he said, tugging at his sleeves. "There seems to be some confusion about your recent acquisition." "No confusion on my end," I said, leaning against the tailgate. "I own the roads, got the title, tax receipts, and surveyor reports to prove it." He cleared his throat. "Even if that's the case, there are long-standing agreements null," I interrupted. "Those agreements were with the developer, not the HOA. He defaulted. You folks never assumed the deed. County sold it fair and square." He hesitated, probably hoping I hadn't done my homework. I had. "Even so," he tried again, "you can't just impose fees without negotiation." "Sure I can," I said. "Private property, you want to use it, you pay for it. Same way they tried to charge me for driving on my own land. Only difference is I did it legally." He shifted uncomfortably. "Our residents won't take kindly to this. Then they should talk to their board about why their streets got sold out from under them." He left without shaking my hand. 3 days later, letters went out to every homeowner in Red Hills Meadows. I made sure of it. Each one outlined the new access agreement, the payment schedule, and a map highlighting which roads were now under my LLC's control. Spoiler, all of them. That's when the real fun started. By the end of the week, my phone lit up with calls from confused residents. Half of them thought it was a scam. The other half were furious that the HOA hadn't told them the roads weren't owned outright. Turns out, most of them assumed their fees over the years had gone toward infrastructure. They hadn't. I didn't answer those calls directly. Instead, I set up a town hall meeting at the local community center. Not the fancy clubhouse in the HOA complex, but a neutral spot down the hill. Word spread fast. People showed up in lawn chairs, some still in tennis gear, others in work boots. The room was packed. I stood at the front with a projector and a folder of documents. "Evening," I said. "My name is Jackson Trent. Some of you know me, some don't, but all of you drive on roads I now own." There were murmurs. A man in the back asked if this was a prank. I clicked the projector on. Up came a satellite image of the neighborhood, every street highlighted in yellow. "These," I said, "were supposed to be transferred to your HOA after the developer defaulted. That never happened. County kept the titles. When the taxes went unpaid, they put them up for auction." "I bought them." A woman near the front raised her hand. "Why would someone sell our roads without telling us?" "That," I said, "is a question for your board." A few heads turned toward Karen, who was sitting stiff in the second row, lips tight enough to cut wire. A man in a collared shirt stood up. "So now what? We pay you. If you want to keep driving on your streets, yes. I'll be using the fees to repave some of the damaged areas, install proper drainage, and ensure snow removal in the winter." "Your HOA hasn't done any of that in years." Someone else asked if the fees were negotiable. "Of course," I said. "But you'll need someone honest at the table, someone who'll read the fine print before signing on behalf of 200 families. That got a few claps. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. After the meeting, folks came up to ask more questions. I kept things short, passed out flyers, and told them to contact me through the LLC's listed number. I wasn't trying to take over their lives, I was just giving them a chance to fix what their leadership broke. But not everyone took it well. The next morning, my mailbox was smashed in. Someone also dumped a bag of rotting fish guts at the end of my fence line. Childish stuff. I installed trail cams that afternoon. Not those cheap plastic ones, either real infrared security units with cellular uplink. Within 48 hours, I had footage of 2 HOA board members, Roger and Denise, slinking around my property after dark. I didn't call them. I called the sheriff. Trespassing, vandalism, and littering on private land. That's 3 misdemeanors in one night. The sheriff knew me, he'd brought his truck in for service a few times. He didn't waste a second. Picked them both up before lunch the next day. That's when everything cracked open. Because during questioning, Roger confessed that the chain across my ranch road, the one that kicked this whole mess off, had been installed without a vote. Karen had ordered it herself, forged board approval, and used HOA funds to pay a contractor under the table. That wasn't just dishonest, it was criminal: embezzlement, unauthorized use of funds, and falsifying HOA documents. The sheriff's office passed the info to the county DA. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just facing angry neighbors, she was facing charges. The board tried to do damage control, but the residents weren't having it. A petition to recall the entire board circulated in under 24 hours. By the weekend, they had enough signatures to force a vote. Karen resigned before it even took place. So did Roger and Denise. In their place, the neighborhood elected a new board, one that actually read the bylaws, disclosed their finances, and showed up to meetings without a superiority complex. They reached out to me with a proposal: reduce the access fees in exchange for a long-term maintenance contract. I agreed on one condition: they had to publicly acknowledge in writing that the HOA had never owned the roads and had acted outside their authority when they tried to block my access. They signed it. I framed it. It hangs in my shop next to a photo of my first truck. Nowadays, the roads in Red Hills Meadows are smoother than they've ever been. The new board sends out monthly reports, and they even host neighborhood cookouts. I get invited. Sometimes I go. Not because I need to, but because I like seeing what happens when people stop letting petty tyrants run the show, and my ranch road stays open. Always. 2 weeks after the new HOA board took over, I got an envelope in the mail that didn't come through the LLC's address. Handwritten. No return label. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper with 6 typed lines and a jagged signature at the bottom. It read like someone trying to sound threatening, but not quite knowing how. The gist of it: you may think you've won, but you don't know what you've stepped into. No name, no address, just the letter, creased, greasy, and reeking of cheap cologne. I didn't have to guess who it came from. Karen had disappeared from the neighborhood like smoke in a windstorm, but people like her don't just fade away. They wait, plot, try to claw their way back from irrelevance. The letter was a warning, but it felt more like a promise she couldn't keep. I turned it over to the sheriff's office just to be thorough. They ran the prints partial, oily, nothing matched in their system. I wasn't worried, but I didn't ignore it either. The new board had been trying to clean up the mess left behind. They'd already uncovered 2 unreported accounts that Karen had been using to funnel HOA funds into private consulting expenses. One of the board members, a retired CPA named Helen, discovered that those transactions had been masked under vague line items like community outreach and legal advisement, both of which had no documentation. Turns out, Karen had been paying a private investigator not to help the HOA, but to dig up dirt on residents she didn't like. Surveillance, background checks, even photographic records, all paid for with HOA dues. That's when Helen called me. She wanted to know if I'd seen any strange vehicles parked along the ranch trail before the road was blocked. I had. A black SUV with tinted windows had been showing up about a month before the chain incident. It never stayed long. I figured it was just real estate scouts checking the land, but now it made sense. We're handing everything over to the county prosecutor, Helen told me. There's enough here for wire fraud at minimum. I asked her what they planned to do about the residents who'd been targeted. We're drafting a formal apology, but, Jackson, some of this stuff is personal. One woman was followed for weeks. Another had her private medical info printed and filed in a folder marked high-risk resident. That folder was found in the back of a locked filing cabinet at the clubhouse. No one had the key until Helen took a bolt cutter to it. The board agreed to press charges. The sheriff's office issued a warrant for Karen's arrest. She was picked up 3 counties over, staying under her maiden name at a friend's lake house. By the time they brought her in, the story had already hit local news. HOA president accused of targeting residents, misusing funds. But the real twist came a few days later. The county clerk contacted me directly. She'd been reviewing the original subdivision plat and deed transfers for Red Hills Meadows after my road ownership triggered a review of surrounding parcels. Buried in the paperwork was a document filed 17 years ago, a temporary restriction order, signed by the original developer, that gave the HOA conditional authority over certain utility easements, but only for 10 years. After that, control was supposed to revert to the county if the HOA failed to file a renewal. They never did, which meant that 3 of their most heavily enforced rules regarding fencing, landscaping near utility poles, and driveway placements had been unenforceable for over 6 years. I passed the word along to a few residents who'd been hit hardest by those rules. One of them, a retired Navy machinist named Walter, had been forced to remove a chain-link fence around his dog kennel after an anonymous complaint deemed it aesthetic pollution. Walter nearly lost his dog when it got loose after the fence came down. He'd kept receipts, photos, even the warning letters. When he found out the rule had no legal standing, he filed a civil complaint and demanded restitution. 3 others followed suit. The HOA's insurance carrier got wind of the lawsuits and immediately froze the association's reimbursement account pending investigation. That meant no contractor payments, no landscaping, no security patrols. The place started to look less like a gated community and more like a hallway halfway through a demolition. Then came the audit. The new board hired an outside firm to go through every financial record from the past 10 years. What they found made what Karen did look like amateur hour. The previous treasurer, a man named Douglas Renner, had been double-dipping HOA payments into a shell landscaping company registered under his cousin's name. Over $150,000 in charges, all for seasonal beautification that never happened. One of the invoices was for planting 40 trees along the west trailhead. The land there was solid rock, no trees. Never had been. Douglas was arrested mid-shift at his real estate office. The guy tried to claim ignorance, said he thought the payments were legitimate and that his cousin handled all the details. The judge didn't buy it. Neither did the IRS, who joined the case once the fake business taxes came into play. The story snowballed. Local reporters started sniffing around. One of them called me for a comment. I told him I wasn't trying to ruin anyone, I just wanted to drive down my own road without someone locking it behind me. He laughed. Well, Mr. Trent, you kicked over a hornet's nest. And from what I hear, the hornets were already eating each other. I didn't deny it. The HOA board, under immense pressure and with more lawsuits looming, voted to dissolve the association entirely. A rare move, but not unprecedented. The residents would maintain their properties independently. Roads would remain private under my LLC unless the county opted to reabsorb them, which they wouldn't. I made sure of that. I offered the residents a new contract, no fees for the first year, provided they helped maintain shared areas voluntarily. Trash pickup, minor road repairs, snow removal when needed. They agreed. We formed a cooperative, not a governing body, no fines, no random inspections, just neighbors helping neighbors. The clubhouse was sold off to a local nonprofit. They turned it into a community center with open access. The tennis courts became a weekend farmers market. The pool stayed open, but now you didn't need a code or a board member's blessing to use it. People started waving again. Not just the polite, obligation wave, but real ones. Kids rode bikes without getting chased by patrol cars for unauthorized loitering. Garden gnomes popped up on lawns like mushrooms after a storm, and me. I went back to my barn, tuned up a few engines, and finally finished the fencing along the north pasture. Every now and then, someone drives out to the ranch to thank me. I tell them it wasn't me who fixed the neighborhood. It was them, deciding they were done being ruled by people who thought control was more important than community. But I do keep one thing on my desk. A photo of that chain they put across my road. Rusted now, snapped in the middle like a brittle twig. A reminder that when someone tries to block your path, sometimes the best way forward is to own the road entirely. The first sign that Karen wasn't completely done came on a muggy Tuesday morning. 3 months after the HOA had officially dissolved. I was elbow deep in the transmission of an old Chevy flatbed when I heard tires crunching up the gravel. One of the new board members' former board now technically pulled up in a dented Corolla. It was Helen, the retired CPA who'd helped uncover most of the financial rot. She didn't get out immediately. Just sat there gripping the steering wheel with both hands, staring at the barn like it held answers. I wiped my hands, walked over and leaned on the open window. "What's got you driving up here before breakfast?" I asked. Helen opened a manila folder and handed it over without saying a word. Inside were scanned documents, court filings, mostly, and a transcript from a deposition. One name kept showing up, Karen Newley. But it wasn't about embezzlement or misuse of funds this time. It was about something else entirely. She had a second LLC, Helen finally said. Set up years before she even moved into Red Hills Meadows. It's registered out of state, but the address traces back to a warehouse outside of Flagstaff. I flipped through the pages. The LLC had purchased a parcel of land flanking the northeastern edge of the community land that butted up against a utility corridor. That area had long been marked for conservation, but apparently someone had been filing construction permits through a dummy contractor. Helen pointed to a line item on one of the invoices. They've been installing illegal drainage lines into the protected watershed, redirecting runoff from the neighborhood and dumping it into state forest land. I didn't say anything at first, just let the weight of it settle. "The kicker," Helen said. "The LLC is leasing that land to a private waste management company. Karen's been collecting payments for over a year, quietly. No reporting, no EPA clearance, it's all unlicensed." I closed the folder. "This go to the feds yet, it will. Counties already flagged the permits. There's a federal environmental investigator flying out on Thursday, but someone needs to verify the site access before they can issue a cease and desist." I looked past the barn toward the hills. That land wasn't visible from any public road. If someone wanted to hide something out there, they could. Easily. "I'll go," I said. That evening, I took the Polaris up through the back trail behind my ranch. The air smelled like pine and ozone, but as I neared the edge of the easement, that changed. Something sour rode the breeze, chemical, faint but wrong. I parked and hiked the rest of the way in, camera slung over my shoulder. What I saw made me stop cold. There was a trench wide and freshly cut running along the slope. PVC piping snaked down into a culvert that fed directly into a ravine. The soil around it was scorched in patches, as if something had leaked and killed the grass. At the base of the trench were black plastic drums, some cracked open, labels peeled or missing. I snapped photos. Wide shots, close-ups, timestamps. I followed the piping up to a squat metal shed with a padlocked door. The windows were painted over, but through a crack near the sill, I could hear the buzz of machinery. I didn't try to break in. No need. I had what I came for. By the next morning, the photos were in the hands of the county investigator. That same afternoon, a federal team arrived, EPA jackets, clipboards, a drone operator, and a pair of agents from the Department of Justice. They cordoned off the site, took soil samples, and ran a full inspection. What they found triggered a formal environmental response. Hazardous waste dumping, unlicensed infrastructure, violation of conservation easements, and worst of all, contamination of a protected creek that fed directly into a nearby wildlife sanctuary. It was a felony. Multiple, actually. The DOJ issued a bench warrant for Karen's arrest. This time, there was no chance of her slipping away under a different name. They tracked her to a condo rental in Santa Fe. She was picked up without incident, flown back under federal custody, and arraigned within 48 hours. The charges were read in full. 47 counts ranging from environmental tampering to wire fraud to conspiracy. The courtroom was packed. I didn't go, but Helen did. She told me Karen didn't speak a word during the hearing. Just sat there, lips pressed in a line as the judge set bail at a figure so high no one even tried to post it. The trial took less than a week. Federal evidence, witness testimonies, documented payments, it was airtight. Karen was sentenced to 22 years without parole. The judge called it a sustained campaign of deception and environmental negligence tantamount to corporate sabotage. The warehouse in Flagstaff was seized. The illegal piping was removed. The soil remediation alone cost the company over $300,000, not counting separate fines from the State Environmental Board. But the fallout wasn't just legal. Red Hills Meadows had already dissolved as an HOA, but what remained of the neighborhood was still trying to rebuild. The revelation that their former president had turned the land into a hazardous dump site shook people. There were community meetings, grief, arguments. But instead of fracturing, something else happened. They got angry. Not at each other, at the system that let one person hold that much unchecked power for so long. A group of residents, led by Walter and Helen, drafted a proposal to form a neighborhood cooperative, not a governing body, but a service collective. It would handle shared responsibilities, maintain open records, and operate by consensus. No fines, no enforcement, just neighbor-to-neighbor accountability. I wasn't part of the founding group, but they asked me to review the bylaws before they submitted them to the county. I added one clause: no individual shall hold unilateral authority over common assets. They approved it unanimously. 6 months passed. The road stayed in good shape. The cooperative paid its fees, modest ones now, scaled back after the legal dust had settled. I kept the LLC active, but more as a formality. No one was trying to cheat the system anymore. One morning, I walked out to the mailbox and found a small envelope tucked halfway down. No name, just a note inside written in careful cursive. Thank you for not giving up on us. No signature. Didn't need one. I stood there a while, watching the breeze ripple across the hills, and thought about everything that had happened. A petty tyrant, a forged chain, a fake company, and a neighborhood that almost collapsed under the weight of its own silence. But it didn't. It survived. It adapted. And me? I went back to fixing engines, tending fences, and enjoying the rare kind of quiet that only comes when people finally learn how to live side by side without someone barking rules from a plastic chair. The chain that started it all is still in my barn, coiled up next to an old post digger. I keep it there not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Power, when hoarded, corrodes, but when shared, it builds, and if someone ever tries to block my road again, well, I still own the street.